Mexico's housing crisis doesn't always look like a rent number on a screen. Sometimes it looks like a family building, a life on ground that was never meant to hold a future. A room added with borrowed money. A wall that stays unfinished. A neighborhood that grows faster than the services around it. Because when housing is scarce or unaffordable, people don't just move. They improvise. And improvisation is not stability. It's survival. For a lot of people in Mexico, the first battle isn't choosing a home. It's finding anything that doesn't crush your entire income. Rent can demand more than people can safely give, and once rent takes the first bite, everything else becomes a sacrifice. Food gets smaller. Transport gets longer. Healthcare gets delayed. Sleep gets lighter. And that pressure doesn't stay financial. It becomes emotional. Because when you can't secure a stable place to live, your life becomes temporary even if you never move. You see it in the way people search for rentals. The deposit, the aval, the guarantor, or proof that someone else will cover you if you fall. The paperwork, the suspicion. You don't feel like a person looking for shelter. You feel like a risk being screened. And even if you pass, you don't relax. Because many people know what it feels like to be one surprise away from losing the address. A landlord changes the terms. A job becomes unstable. A family emergency drains what you were saving. And suddenly, your home is not a home. It's a countdown. So people adapt in ways that should scare a society. Adults share cramped rooms long past the age they expected. Families squeeze more bodies into the same space. A living room becomes a bedroom at night. A kitchen table becomes an office in the morning. Small space living is not a trend here. It's compression. A bunk bed isn't a clever idea. It's the price of existing. A wall desk isn't minimalism. It's the last surface left where your life can function. Storage walls aren't style. They're evidence. Evidence that the space cannot hold a normal life, so the life must fold. These aren't solutions, they're coping. Because the alternative isn't better. The alternative is losing the address. And Mexico has another kind of housing pain that people don't always say out loud. Informality. Entire lives built without the security of clear paperwork, a home that exists physically but not safely in the system, a place you can live in but not fully defend. That is a different kind of fear. Because if your housing is informal, you can feel invisible. And when you feel invisible, you feel expendable. Now the shock factor. Mexico is not a country without land. It is not a country without people willing to build. It is not a country without need. And yet millions live in overcrowded conditions, precarious structures, or long commutes that steal their lives because stable, affordable housing is not available where life actually happens. That's what makes it feel unfair. You can work every day and still never feel settled. You can do everything right and still be trapped between rent you can't carry and ownership you can't reach. And when that happens, the crisis becomes a national mood. People don't just get stressed, they get tired. Tired of hearing that this is normal. Tired of watching the gap widen between what a person earns and what a home costs. Tired of being told to wait while their lives shrink. Tired of being asked to accept less space, less dignity, less future. So why does it keep happening? Not slogans, not blame, just forces that stack together. First, demand concentrates where opportunity concentrates. Work, education, services, safety, people are pulled toward the same areas. But housing does not expand at the speed life demands. So the market tightens, and the pressure moves down onto the people with the least flexibility. Second, the cost of building and financing can shut people out. When credit is hard, when payments are heavy, when wages do not match prices, ownership becomes unreachable. So households stay in renting, or they build informally, or they crowd together. And each path carries its own form of insecurity. Third, housing becomes a financial product, not just a place to sleep, a way to store value, a way to generate income. And when housing behaves like an asset, the local worker becomes the weakest bidder in their own community. Fourth, short stay. Demand can pull homes away from long-term life. When a property earns more as a temporary stay than as a long-term rental, it stops being a home. It becomes a machine. And ordinary renters can't outbid a machine. Fifth, infrastructure and services do not always keep up. Housing spreads outward, but transport, water, and safety do not always follow. So the commute becomes part of the rent. Hours disappear. Energy disappears. Life becomes smaller again. Now add the pressure point that people feel but struggle to talk about without it turning into hate. Migration and asylum. Mexico is also a corridor of movement. People arrive seeking safety, seeking work, seeking a future. When humanitarian arrivals increase, shelters and emergency services in entry areas can be stretched. More people need immediate beds, temporary rooms, basic support. That can add local strain to emergency housing and the lowest cost segment nearby. But it does not explain Mexico's housing crisis by itself. The crisis is larger than one factor. It is affordability, informality, uneven supply, and a system that leaves too many people building their lives on unstable ground. Still, when the pressure rises, people feel trapped. And when people feel trapped, they look for someone to blame. Not because they are hateful by default, because they feel powerless. Now, what is the government doing? On paper, Mexico has national housing institutions and programs designed to support home ownership and housing finance. There are systems meant to help workers access mortgages. There are social housing strategies and public efforts intended to expand access for lower-income households. There are regulations that touch rental practices in some places and attempts to manage housing supply pressures. So, yes, programs exist, institutions exist, plans exist. But people don't live on paper. They live in outcomes, and the outcomes many people recognize are still the same. Rent still eats too much. Ownership still feels unreachable. Informal housing still grows because people have no safer option. Overcrowding still spreads because families are trying to survive. And the fear is still inside the body because the ground doesn't feel secure. People expected a simple deal. Work should buy stability. A home should be the base layer of life. But when the base layer becomes unstable, everything above it becomes fragile. Relationships, health, education, trust. And that is why the housing crisis in Mexico doesn't feel like a single problem. It feels like a slow removal of normal life. A quiet lesson repeated every month. You don't get to settle. You only get to cope. So here's the question that should make people uncomfortable. If housing in Mexico is a competition, who gets to win a home? And what happens to everyone who keeps losing? Subscribe to follow this series, country by country. This is not one place. It is a pattern. If this felt real, hit like. Tell me in the comments, what was the first thing housing took from you? Money, time, dignity, or the feeling that you are safe? Subscribe, because the next country is worse in a different way.